Hello. I have never done market research here in Berlin, so I'm wondering how many here knows about Hyper Island? Okay, we'll wait until we do some market research then. Well, I'm so glad to be here. I'll spend like 1 minute talking about Hyper Island, and then I'll spend the rest of the time talking about you and me. So Hyper Island is an educational company. We have schools and we do training for students, but also for companies. And it's a Swedish school that started in Sweden about 20 years ago and specializes in the digital technology. So 20 years ago, the new emerging technology was, can anyone guess? It was CD-ROM production. So at that time, Hyper Island was a school in CD-ROM production. Today, we actually exist in several places in the world. In Sweden, of course, with 2 schools, in Singapore, in UK, Manchester and London, in New York, and in Sao Paulo. And we also have a collaboration here in Berlin with Wired, doing classes for professionals. And we have students, young students that learn how to excel in digital, become entrepreneurs, and learn everything around design, tech, and user behaviors. But then we bring that knowledge into a bunch of companies that actually need to learn a lot as well. But today I'm going to talk about being a captain in chaos. Because my view is that we come from quite a simple world. We come from a linear world where things were very predictable. You can almost feel that. It used to be easier. Life used to be a little bit easier. As a manager, or as a coworker, or as a communicator, it used to be easier because we, us users, customers and clients, we had quite a predictable behavior. And today we've walked into what I call a non-linear world, where everything is much more unpredictable. So if you're in banking, for example, you need to have bank office hours open and so on, but you also need to have this awesome app on the phone for other people that want to do their banking errands whenever they would like. So this is a world we've entered where we communicate, we shop, we do stuff all the time, everywhere, whenever we want. And the technical development is driving this change. And we've been through that before, us humans. For example, when we went from being nomads to being farmers, or being farmers into the industrial era when we moved into the city. But there's one difference in this change, and that is probably the speed that we're going through right now. So you say that a technical device or a technical thing or a service has become a mass technique or a mass service when it reaches 50 million users. And it took the car 75 years to reach 50 million users. And it took radio 38 years to reach 50 million users. And it took television 13 years. Television was really, really fast. It took television 13 years to reach 50 million users. And it took the internet 4 years to reach 50 million users. And it took the iPod. Do you remember the iPod? Yeah, well, it took the iPod 3 years, and then like after 3.5 years, it moved into the phone instead. There's something that took 35 days to reach 50 million users. And this is not just fun facts. Well, it is fun facts, but it says something about the speed that we're in at the moment. And let's look at one more example. This was the installation of a Pope 2005. A lot of people were there. They were probably very, very proud of being there at that moment and felt a lot of important feelings. And when they left that moment, they probably went home and shared their stories with friends and families. Only 8 years later, the same situation looks like this. It's the same human need to be in a situation and share the stories about the situation. But we do it in a different way. We do it in real time. Can anyone guess how this would look like 8 years from today? Well, we probably can't. And that's first time, because in the 50s, we kind of knew what the 60s were going to look like. And in the 60s, we kind of knew what the 70s were going to look like. But today, we can't really say how this situation will look like, how we will actually share our stories and our feelings and emotions. And I work in a global company, and when I'm asleep, Singapore is awake and working. And when I work, New York is sleeping. And the first thing I do every morning before I get out of bed is actually watch my emails on the phone. So I open my phone, and when I open my phone, I get so many messages. It's Facebook, it's Twitter, it's emails, it's some Snapchats, and it's Instagram, all these messages, all this flow of communication that reaches me. And sometimes I feel like living in this world feels like this. Anyone who can recognize this? Well, anyway, I started to blame other people and realized that it's us that are doing this. I'm a big contributor to making other people feel like washed over with communication and stuff. And this, of course, affects everybody. It affects every company, every industry, every organization, everybody. And I do a lot of training of managers and board members and so on. And when I train them, I usually start by taping up this curve on the floor, and I say, so what are you when it comes to digital? Are you like an innovator? You create apps and great platforms and really profit from the network society? Or are you an early adopter that really, oh, here's a new thing, I want to try that? Or are you an early majority, so when the neighbors try the new thing, you'll go on? Or are you a late majority? Well, you wait until everybody has an iPad, you also get an iPad. Or are you like a laggard, like my dad, who's a veterinarian and still writes his invoices with a typewriter? Well, people usually say, at least in the Nordic countries, that they are in the red spot. Well, I like booking tickets online, and I'm very curious. I want the new iPhone, and I actually looked at the Apple Watch in a magazine, and well, I don't create stuff, but I feel very early, adapting to digital technology. And then I ask them, so, but what about your work? At your workplace, the company where you're working, where are you there? And then they step back and go to the blue spot and say, oh gosh, at work we're laggards. We don't do anything. We don't adapt to our clients. We don't adapt to our users. We're so slow. We work in silos. It's just not working. So I'm wondering how it can be that all these companies are like filled with early adopters, but still don't manage to adapt faster than they are. Now I'm going to make a short poll here. So how many of you recognize yourself in this picture? Stand up. Yeah. I would say it's about 60%. That's about much research that I do. Well, anyway, I would like you to think about this for a little moment. Reflect with your neighbor. Do you recognize yourself in the diffusion curve? And why is this? Why is it that a lot of companies, a lot of industries are full of people that are early adopters, but they still don't develop? So I'll give you about a minute and a half in 2 and 2s. Okay. So here in the room we have the answers to this dilemma. What I think a lot about is how to be a captain in this chaos, and how to actually work with self-leadership in this chaos. Because that's what I believe, that leadership is too important to be left to managers. So we are all leaders, and we all have at least one person to lead, and that is ourselves. And I think the most important thing is to be in this chaos is actually to understand how change affects people. The first thing people do when they're object to change, when they're opposed to change and change is happening, is that they do like this. And when they can't breathe any longer because they've done that, they ask themselves 5 questions. What is going to happen to me? 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 And then the CEOs ask, what will happen to the company if we don't change? But these are the 5 most important questions that anyone will ask. It's easy to laugh around that, but it's very human. So I think a lot about working with companies and working with students and trying to support people in change and transformation. I think a lot about this model. It's how us human beings react and change. This model suggests that we first go through an ending phase where we feel strong feelings of sorrow and loss. And we know what we're losing. We have no idea what we're moving into. And everybody who's lost someone, because this is not just at work, this is any change, any loss you can have, know that feeling and know your needs at that feeling. Some people stay in that ending stage. But most people move on to the neutral phase. This is kind of a zone where it's uncomfortable to be because you know you can never go back. Things are never going to be the way they used to be, but you don't really know what you're heading towards. So you feel very lost. Some of your lost feelings you take with you, but it's more around confusion. And you might be very energetic in this phase, but you're actually just running around. You're not doing anything that actually brings you forward. And some people stay in this phase as well. Most of us, we move on to the beginning phase. And this is when you feel that you actually left something behind. You've turned the page and you feel that you are actually a driver in this change. You almost maybe think that you invented it. That's the passion you can feel about the change. But you feel that you've taken a new step in towards something new and exciting. The second thing is to practice self-leadership, to lead yourself and really have a conscious way of doing things and saying things. To support myself in practicing leadership, I've actually made my own leadership guide. And I want you guys to think about how your leadership guide would look like if you had one. I've got so far 4 chapters in my leadership guide. Chapter 1 is I have a yearly development talk with myself. Now, people that work in big organizations have a yearly development talk with their boss, of course. How am I going to develop? How do I perform? It's called performance review and so on. Well, I have one with myself. And I ask myself, how did I perform? What did I do well? Did I develop? And do I want to stay in this job another year? And then I ask myself, how is my marriage? Do I want to keep this man for another year? He doesn't really know about this, don't tweet it. But I ask myself, is this the life that I actually want to live? And if it's not, what can I do about it? The second thing I think a lot about that I really try to almost write in my hand every morning when I get up is how can I be a front seat driver in my own life? How can I make sure that what happens to me are by my own choice? And every time people hear me being a little bit victimized, I tell them, you just tell me not to be a victim because I want to be a front seat driver in my life. I don't want to be a victim of circumstances that just have happened. The third thing is I feel very comfortable when I feel on top of things. When I actually feel like I'm a little bit in control, and then when I actually feel that I actually You know, I'm not just in a flow of something. I actually am. It's kind of the driver thing again, that I'm actually in control and I can decide, and I have competence enough to decide what I'm going to do. So I focus a lot on how to stay on top of things, how to feel that I am on top of things. And I do different kinds of courses, and I do different kinds of developing stuff for myself to feel on top of things. The third thing in my leadership guide is I think a lot about flow. So a lot of people think about things that don't work. But in this era, where it really feels chaotic once in a while, and we're very, very non-linear, I try to focus on what works. So I try to remember, for example, at work, I try to remember a situation when I felt that I was at flow, when I had a flow. And I bring that situation into other situations. I bring that feeling into other situations. And I try to recreate it in the morning when I go to work. So I can create flow at work. And then I've done an experiment the last couple of years. Because I used to feel really, really stressed. I'm a CEO of a global company. I have a lot of coworkers. I have 3 children, and I have 2 horses, and I love going horseback riding. And we travel, and we do a lot of activities in my family, and of course I travel a lot at work as well. So I felt a very big amount of stress. A lot of the stress was connected to when do I work? When do I actually shut off work? Should I be available all the time? I was thinking a lot about, I think the people in my age do that. We think a lot about time. So I decided to do an experiment with myself, that I would stop measuring time, my own time. And I will start measuring things in energy instead. So I would not be worried if I worked, late at night for a whole week. I would not be worried if I, came home late, or if things took longer than they should have. I would not be worried if I spent too much time with my kids instead of working. I start measuring in energy. So if I've done something that takes a lot of energy, I need to do something that gives me a lot of energy. And the way it's been working now as a tool in my life is that, for example, tomorrow and on Thursday, I have a board meeting, and that takes kind of a lot of energy. We have a board seminar and a lot of people, and we are, I need to be really prepared, a lot of figures. It's really, kind of taking the corporate out of me. And I know that I'm going to be super, super tired afterwards, and it's going to take a lot of myself. So I've already booked in that on Friday, I have a whole day off horseback riding, because that will refill my energy again. And when I started thinking about, thinking less about time and thinking more about energy, giving energy and receiving energy, or letting myself receive energy, I stopped being as stressed. I'm of course also stressed once in a while, but I stopped being as stressed as I used to be. Then I have a 5th thing in my leadership guide that I'm not going to talk so much about. We're going to practice it instead. And that is reflection. So I'm going to invite you all to sit quietly for 1 minute. It's a quite long time in our society where we communicate all the time. And you can't tweet now. You can only be with yourself. For 1 minute, see if we can handle that. I'll take time and reflect. So how would your guide look like? If you had a leadership guide over yourself, to support yourself to be the captain in your chaotic life, what would that look like? Take 1 minute in silence. Okay, so everyone who thought that was a very long time, raise your hand. No, not so many. You guys have been practicing reflection. Good. Finally, I think of one thing a lot. When you're going to work with change, and when you're going to work with business transformation, or transforming a company, or transforming individuals to, move into the digital era and the networked world, there's just one thing you need to think about concerning change management, and that is how to eat an elephant. Do you guys know how to eat an elephant? Well, of course, bit by bit. Because if you start planning and looking at the whole elephant, when you're going to move into a change, or when you're going to change your whole behavior, or when you're working with changing people or changing organizations, if you look at the whole part, you're never going to manage. But if you just start working in an agile way, taking one bite at a time, you're much more likely to succeed. Thank you. I'm sorry, it went faster.
You were so quick, he was giving you the time sign. That's why I'm so sorry. Lyle, I'm now that you're here to take a couple of questions, yeah? Don't go away. We're about to start with the next session right away on stage. But Johanna is also here to answer a couple of your questions. Is there anybody who has a direct, immediate question following the talk? Are you all reflecting about the talk right now?
I put them in a mode.
You did. They're in the zone right now. Are you going to be with us for a little bit?
Yes.
Okay, so if people are reflecting upon the question that they might be asking you in a couple of minutes, they can find you next to the stage. Wonderful. Thank you so much for being with us. Let's have another big round of applause, please.